Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. I'm Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock and...
Hi, Thomas and Robert. So enjoying the show. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you both. You light up my day. I'm calling because I have a question about Venus and the Sun. And I know they can't square each other, but what about a semi-square? I happen to have one of these in my chart, so I am particularly curious. All right, thank you.
And you know, Robert, she brings up a really good question because, honestly, I don't hear you talk about the quote-unquote minor aspects very much. This one, of course, being one, 30 degrees apart from each other, which the Sun and Venus can be. So what about that?
Well, I'll tell you, the only so-called minor aspect that I use all the time, every time, is the inconjunct or the quincunx, the 150 degrees. It's an aspect in the birth horoscope from the first to the sixth house, or the first to the eighth house. So the inconjunct plays a big role in both health and work, money and work, all of that. And health and work and occupation are very much tied up in astrology. If you're in a job you hate, you're not going to be healthy, as a rule, either psychologically and or physically, and vice versa. If you're in a field of work that you love doing, you can do it for as long as you live, and you'll tend to be healthier. Those things are tied up in the sixth house. So I do use that minor aspect, but her question is great because she's right. Venus never gets very far from the Sun, neither does Mercury. And Venus can make a semi-square. What's important to know, is it applying or separating? In other words, is Venus in front of the Sun making the semi-square or behind the Sun? So she didn't say. But within the restrictions of Venus and its distance from the Sun, what really is important to me with Venus and Mercury is if they are cazimi, which means they are within 1 degree of the Sun. Then their importance, Venus's archetype, Mercury's archetype, suddenly becomes very prominent in the life. With Venus in as far from the Sun as it ever gets, which is this semi-square, then what you have is a minor stress aspect. I like stress aspects. Stress aspects motivate people. They're aspects of ambition because they are aspects of frustration to some degree. And frustration is what makes us act, or conflicts make us act, or crises make us act. Without those, why should we act? If we're comfortable and we like things the way they are, so we just maintain the status quo, which is different. So when you have Venus in a semi-square aspect to the Sun, it tends to indicate that the person always, even though, especially if they're, say, a Taurus or something, even when they're in love and things are going well at work and things are stable and comfortable financially, there is still a side of them that wants to make it even more perfect. That always senses a little, there's some little something I need to improve about myself or about my partner, about my family. So it's that can be a very constructive kind of aspect to have, actually, because the person is always in the process of trying to make themselves better and the people that they love better, so they can be problem solvers for themselves and other people because they're doing the problem solving out of love as opposed to out of control, trying to control other people. So it's not a bad aspect at all. It will it's a minor aspect. So it will tend to show some either fluctuations in financial security throughout the life, or because Venus, let's say if Venus is in a double sign, as it is here, it can show more than one income stream, having two occupations at once, or having a day job and having a creative job. So that's the sort of indications of that. So I don't make too much out of these aspects of Venus and Mercury to the Sun, unless, again, you've got that really important emphasis of the cazimi.
I'd like to tap into your experience with all these readings that you've done over nearly 60 years. You have touched and released so many different areas of astrology that I'm curious why not use things like the semi-square, 45 degrees, or the quintile comes up a lot, 72, or the binovile, 80. These other minor degrees as you make your way from 0 around to 360, or at least to 180, that could be used. Why do you not use those?
Only because, as you said, when you've done this long, especially when you're starting out, I tried everything. And I realized, okay, I'm getting a lot more out of this than I am that. Same, for example, when Chiron became popular back in when was it, the 70s? And of course I tried it, but I really realized pretty quickly, it's fine, it works, but I'm not getting anything from Chiron that I don't already get. And it's the same thing with the minor aspects. There is so much to be gained from studying the major aspects, from transits or solar arcs and so on, and really delving into those, that frankly, you don't have time. I don't, to get into any depth about the minor aspects. And to me, unless one of them should stand out for some reason, what were some of the other minor aspects you mentioned, which I don't use?
Oh, goodness. I've got a whole list of them here. You want the 72? That's a quintile.
Quintile. A lot of astrologers use that. They think it indicates a specific talent. And it may, I don't know. If I'm going to estimate talent in a chart, I'm going to look to the ruler of the fifth house itself, the ruler of the second house, and the second house itself. I'm going to look to the sun sign. I'm going to look to the whole chart, really. So looking at one point and saying that indicates the person's talent is so simplistic to me, it's not even worth bothering with, to tell you the truth. You can't find something in one place. You have to constantly consider how these archetypes relate to each other and what signs are they in. Are they favorable signs for that archetype and so on? So it's a whole conglomeration of considerations. And I just find people, for example, everybody will focus on Chiron and think they've covered health. That they haven't. The wounded healer. Okay, so fine. What does that, how does this help you on a pragmatic day-to-day? And it can. I'm not saying Chiron doesn't work. It's just, again, to me, it's another piece of work that I've already gotten from somewhere else. So why should I take time on that when I'd rather spend it discussing this Saturn opposite Saturn transit, which is a hell of a lot more important.
In a given period of time, yes.
So that's really the only reason I don't use them. It's not because they don't work.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Good information, too, and to think about replacing the information about the Cazimi there. So hope that answers your question about the semi-sextile or any of the rest of you who have that aspect in your own chart. We had another question that kind of almost parlays off of some of what Robert was just talking about. Let's listen to this one.
Hi there, this is Josephine again. I feel like I'm stalking you now. I'm not. It's just that more and more questions pop up as I catch up on past episodes. The episode I listened to yesterday was about how the planets are no longer in their proper signs now because of the way the world moves, or the Earth moves and whatever. And I was wondering, how would it look if we did charts according to where planets are now, like in the real signs they're in? I mean, we say that the sun is in Aries when it's actually not. It's in another constellation when you actually look up in the sky. How would it look to do a chart based on where the planets really are today? It'd be interesting to hear.
Well, I love being stalked by Josephine because her questions are so probing and so interesting. And this question is probably one that, at least it used to, cause more arguments between astrologers than any other question. And that is basically sidereal versus tropical astrology. Signs and constellations are not the same thing. 9 out of 10 astrologers don't know that. Back when astrology began, 12,500 years ago is the earliest known carbon-dated record of a carving of a lunar calendar on an animal's femur bone. So we know it, but when it really became influential, the vernal equinox did indeed occur against the constellation of Aries. And during that, this is now based on the precession of the equinoxes, which move backward through the zodiac. So during the age of Aries, the ram, for example, Judaism emerged as the first monotheistic religion. And today, on high holy days, Jews blow the shofar, the ram's horn. So that ancient archetype is carried forward, and it still does. Then, as the precession moved from Aries back into the constellation of Pisces, the fishes, Christianity emerged. And so today on bumpers all around the world, we see little fish decals celebrating Christianity. So without even knowing it, the world's great religions have incorporated astrotheology. Now, today, the vernal equinox does not appear against the constellation of Aries. It appears against the constellation of Pisces, a very early degree of Pisces, because the precession is moving backwards. So it's going from Pisces into Aquarius, the age of Aquarius, which we've all been told. So what you're looking at here is a huge misunderstanding of the constellational background. It was never supposed that the constellations sent forth magic rays to Earth that had any effect whatsoever. The constellations were and still are simply markers for seasonal relationships between the Earth and the Sun, most especially, and secondarily the Earth to the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all the planets. Seasonal relationships. So even though the vernal equinox occurs now against the constellation of Pisces, it is still spring. The weather hasn't changed. The climate hasn't changed. Spring is where you plant. Fall is where you harvest. And that's, again, an Earth-Sun relationship. So the background of the constellations simply were markers that became shorthand for these seasonal archetypes. So today now, we still have Aries symbolism in the spring at the vernal equinox of new life and new beginnings and so on, and budding and blossoming. And the same with the autumnal equinox, which used to occur against the constellation Libra, but today appears against early Leo. The point is that regardless of the constellational background, the season on Earth, these cyclical seasons on Earth are the same. So until I really thought this through, and it's not just me, I mean, you can read this too, but the constellational background. So today, when we refer to the signs as astrologists, we're referring to those seasonal relationships. There are 12 seasons that astrology recognizes, unlike the 4 that we commonly do. So the signs are still what they've always been, but the signs are not the same thing as the constellations. And a lot of astrologers get hung up in this, and I always wonder why. Because my understanding of how this works is this seasonal basis. Whereas if you're preoccupied with the constellational background of where the sun really is constellationally on the vernal equinox, then you've suddenly got to start redefining the seasons to match your preconceived notion that the constellations themselves exert some sort of influence, which, when you think about it, is rather strange, because the stars in the constellations are separated by millions, if not billions of miles. They only appear the way they do from this little pinprick called Earth. That's all. So the confusion between these two is still, I'm afraid, rampant among astrologers. I hope that helps her get a little clearer on the difference between the constellations and the signs, and the difference between Vedic and Western astrology. And again, I've known one or two Vedic astrologers from India, actually, who were really astonishing in terms of event predictions. They were lousy at metaphysics and psychological and creating your own reality, that old notion that we can read these belief systems from horoscopes and therefore affect. They weren't that at all. They were absolutely straight on predictive astrologies, and in some cases really stunning. But the implication behind the kind of work that they do is that astrology is fatalistic. And in fact, everybody I've ever known from India feels that way about it, because that's how they were brought up in their culture. It's fatalistic. This is going to happen to you. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, I don't believe that.
I don't believe that I'm a Libra or that you're a Virgo.
Yeah, but never forget, I've got Sun conjunct Neptune. I can sure act like it.
Yeah, but mine's on the same degree, so I can
Fake it till you
I
make
can make
it.
you cry. All right, thank you so much for both of these great questions and answers. We appreciate it so much. If I could just point you on our way out here to the show notes, that has everything you need in order to pursue the other things that we have going on here, including the course, the Discord channel, readings with Robert are in there, our YouTube channel link, where Robert has his own playlist. It's just great. The whole package is in the show notes. We'll see you there. Thanks so much for listening. Catch you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.